If you've been around the gaming areas of Reddit or Imgur in the past year or so, the GIFs you're seeing right now might look familiar to you. They were posted by the game development company Scraping Bottom Games in an attempt to drum up some pre-release marketing and hype, and to generally spread the word about this game they're working on, Fictorum. And wow, did it work! I pulled all of these GIFs from Imgur, and each one had many hundreds of thousands of views on it. Just imagine how all these views translated to various discussions and shares on social media, and you have a game that's poised for success when it finally releases. And credit where credit is due, this was a great idea from Scraping Bottom Games, and they did a good job of promotion. These GIFs are amazing looking. The visage of an all-powerful wizard summoning meteor storms and leveling villages and castles with the power of an angry toddler taking his wrath out on a village built out of Legos and crushed dreams. Being a powerful wizard is an easy power fantasy to get behind, and Fictorum seemed poised to give the gamers exactly that. Full disclosure, this review is being built on slightly over 3 hours of total playtime, so if you don't want to consider this a full review, fine, consider it a first impression. While I can't speak for the complete experience, I feel like I've seen and experienced enough of the game to form an opinion and to share those opinions with you. Fictorum is all flash and no substance. The game is a roguelite action RPG that's sort of a mix between FTL and Lichdom Battle Mage. I know the latter of these two games doesn't really have a good reputation, but if nothing else, I enjoyed the spellcasting mechanics of that game. It felt powerful and explosive. You start off on a map with some mountain peaks that operate as nodes. The basic story, at least I think, is that the whole world, except for the mountain peaks, is corrupted with a poisonous mist, so only the mountaintops are inhabitable. And your character, the Fictorum, is trying to flee the Inquisition by traveling from peak to peak. This is where the FTL comparisons come in. And if you've played FTL before, this whole thing will probably look pretty familiar to you. Your goal is to get from the left side of the node map to the right side, with the Inquisition following close behind you. If they catch up, you're in for a very difficult fight, so try to stay ahead of them. And also like FTL, if you die, it's game over. Well, kinda. You're given the option to rewrite history and try again, which is a nice touch if you want to play more casually. Every node has its own miniature story attached to it as your character finds his way to the peak's nexus, which he can then use to teleport to the next mountain peak. The non-combat story will happen through little text blurbs, much in the way it does in FTL. You might find some town in need of assistance, or you might play with a few children hiding in a tree, or you might get ambushed by a hunting party that tracked you down to that village as you were grabbing a bite to eat. It's all random, and occasionally the story will result in a combat scenario, which is where the real meat of the gameplay lies. In a combat scenario, most often your main goal is to get to the area's nexus and enter it, but occasionally you'll be tasked with defeating all the quest enemies or destroying something specific or protecting the townsfolk. It all really depends on the story that happened there. You're able to do this because, of course, you're the Fictorum and you're incredibly powerful. You can sprint and cast a wide array of spells including fireballs, meteors, ice lances, rock walls, blink, chain lightning, and so much more. You're even given the ability to empower these spells with up to 3 runes and apply a dynamic shaping system to empower these runes to increase the power and versatility of a spell at the cost of mana. It's actually a really cool system. These spells are pretty powerful in their own right, but with the right runes you can turn a short-range, piddly weak fireball into a fast, long-ranged powerhouse with homing properties. And you don't even have to activate the shaping of the spell to get the rune's properties. You only need to do that if you want more power from any specific effect. If you want more spells or different runes, you'll need to either dig them up by looting houses, hope a random enemy drops one, get it from a random event, or buy it from one of the game's many shops that may appear on a node. And while the spell system is really cool, the rest of the game surrounding it is a messy cluster of poor AI, frame slowdowns due to the massive amount of physical bodies on the screen after you destroy a building, a general lack of variety in the gameplay, a dull and uninspired art style, and an equipment system that is mostly uninteresting and tedious. Let's begin with that equipment system. You're given a few equipment slots to increase your defenses and other stats, but it is, for the most part, very Diablo-style upgrades or side grades. They're mostly very uninteresting and tend to be nothing more than cell bait that forces you to constantly weigh your new equipment against what you're wearing, most often for incredibly minor upgrades that just make the whole system feel really tedious. The only really interesting part is the rings. You're given 2 ring slots, and each ring has the ability to be enchanted with a spell scroll. These spell scrolls tend to be less powerful than your spell books, but give a lot more utility. The ring you start with has a short-range teleport on it, and you can have other things like a projectile barrier, a rock wall, or a force push. You obtain new spells and new items by buying them at random shops, or getting random drops from enemies, or going into homes and finding a shiny thing to loot. And again, more often than not, it's just boring garbage that you're gonna waste your time inspecting due to the absurd amount of stats that you need to compare and then just end up selling it anyway. And because the inventory system is so dull, going into homes to maybe have a chance of getting a terrible item, or if you're really lucky, an upgrade or a healing potion, soon starts to feel like a waste of time that you're better off without. All of the currency that you can get through selling all this garbage isn't entirely useless though, as you can use it to enchant or upgrade your equipment and spells, but that's not enough to make the tedium really worth it in my eyes. I think my issues with the inventory system comes down to the fact that it's all far too random, far too common, and way too uninteresting. I think I'd much prefer it if the Fictorum never picked up a majority of the items he found and only deemed legendary or unique items worth his time. Like maybe some awesome shoulder pads that send a wave of force around him if he's attacked, or a stormy robe that periodically strikes enemies within a certain range with bits of lightning. Some very interesting items with clear strengths and weaknesses and fun attributes rather than, oh, I move 10% slower but I have 2% more armor and regenerate mana 7% faster. Yay! Most of the time you're not even gonna notice that stuff until your current run ends and you're forced to start over, and only then will you realize that, hey, now you're slow and weak and your mana regeneration sucks. I mean, look at the way FTL does it. The currency and the inventory systems are done phenomenally in that game, where you're scrambling for every bit of currency that you can so you can purchase a specific upgrade or upgrades that you've had your eye on so you can finally equip that amazing dual laser that you've had in your inventory for 3 sectors now. Every upgrade feels spectacularly meaningful, and many of them potentially change the way you play. But unfortunately, even a more solid inventory system wouldn't save this game from being really dull once you get past the shiny veneer of destructible buildings and the power trip of being a powerful spellcaster. The art style here is nothing to write home about. It's nothing too awful, but it's nothing memorable either. What is awful though is the way the game handles its lighting. It's rare to find a shadow out in this world, it seems, and the landscape seems so unnaturally lit, with absolutely no thought to relative lighting or anything that could make this poorly textured landscape look more interesting or better. At one point, the contrast between the sky and the ground was so remarkably high that I had a hard time seeing anything moving so I could defend myself, and it was actually causing a minor amount of eye strain. The same area seemed to have a light projecting from below the world, because at one point I even saw a shadow of myself on a bridge above me. With any luck, future me has edited this video to show you that awful contrast and floating shadow. When Fictorum isn't difficult to look at, it's just dull. I think paying more attention to the lighting would have gone a long way here, and it has a markedly negative effect on the combat, since it can make things incredibly difficult to see while you're fighting. As for the gameplay, there's not a whole hell of a lot to talk about here. I already mentioned the different spells, the spell shaping, the looting, and the destructible environment. That's about all there really is to it. At least for as much as I was able to stomach playing the game. There's nothing really complex about the combat or the encounters. You get a quest, you do the quest, and every enemy behaves about the same. Melee enemies will run in a straight line towards you until they die, ranged enemies will do the same, at least until they're close enough range to shoot you, and occasionally an enemy will have spells or a barrier or invisibility, but none of it really feels like it shakes up the combat at all. There really needed to be more interesting enemy types, like maybe something that flies, maybe some gigantic creature, maybe a melee enemy that is capable of more than just running in a straight line until it dies. I guess there is that one enemy that explodes, and sometimes enemies sidestep or blink reactively to avoid damage, but like I said, it just isn't enough. And after you've killed your 50th wave of mooks in a dozen different ways, you've about seen it all. The game isn't completely void of fun though, as occasionally a silly interaction will have you laughing. Like every time I force push some stupid footman off a cliff, Or that one time I summoned a rock wall underneath a guy's feet and he launched into space and then came crashing back down with a spectacular shriek and thud as gravity took his life. Or that time the same thing happened but with an ice lance that I shot at his feet and instead of harming him for some reason, launched him about 30 feet up into the air just to have him crashing back down just like the other guy. Moments like that can be pretty hilarious, but the ones that I mentioned are clearly bugs based on the way the animation worked. I mean, sure, you can summon meteors on a village and destroy homes and have the rubble kill all your enemies, or you can tear every building down to its foundation if you please, or watch homes crumble slowly with precision shots, but it's not really any more fun than playing with a stack of rigid bodies in a physics sandbox. This game's gonna cost about $20 when it's released on August 9th, but if you're really interested in this game, I would advise waiting for a deep sale or for the developers to vastly improve on what they have. I wouldn't count on that happening though, since they're not releasing into early access. In the end, Fictorum has some good ideas, but it feels like maybe the developers let their own hype get in their head. Everything is janky, and the game's core idea gets pretty boring unless you're able to get lost in the raw power fantasy that this game can provide. It doesn't look particularly good, it doesn't play very well, and some of the core systems like the inventory don't feel like they add quite enough to the game outside of a certain amount of tedium due to the management of it all. It honestly doesn't feel like much more than a tech demo, and probably should have gone through a lot more revisions to find something fun that's hidden in all this mess. And it's too bad too, because I was really looking forward to my new life as a lightning-slinging, town-destroying powerhouse.